Hello everybody and welcome back. Today we are going to continue with our ecology unit. We are on unit 1, lesson number 4, and today is going to be all about primary productivity. So at the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain the concept of ecosystem boundaries, describe the process of photosynthesis and respiration. This is a review from biology. Distinguish among the trophic levels that exist in food chains and food webs. And we'll be doing that more in depth in our next lesson. Quantify ecosystem productivity, and then we'll be explaining energy transfer, efficiency, and trophic pyramids. Again, the trophic pyramids and the energy transfer are going to be in our next lesson, but we're going to kind of just get started with primary productivity today. So the first thing we're going to talk about are ecosystem boundaries, and ecosystem boundaries are typically not clearly defined. So some ecosystems like caves and lakes, they have very distinctive boundaries. So you can come to the mouth of a cave and clearly be able to identify where the ecosystem begins. Or lakes have very distinct edges around them, so you know specifically where the ecosystem lies. However, in most ecosystems, it's difficult to determine where one ecosystem stops and the next one begins. So even though it's helpful to distinguish between two different ecosystems, a lot of the times ecosystems actually interact with one another. So it can be hard to see where one ends and one begins. And then our biosphere is just the region of our planet where life resides. So it's the combination of all ecosystems on Earth. Typically, we refer to the biosphere as the planet itself. So these are large and small ecosystems. So the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem includes the land within Yellowstone National Park and then many adjacent properties. So this is a very large land area. It's a very large ecosystem. And then here, there's a little drop or a few drops of rainwater in a knot in a tree, and this is also an ecosystem. Okay, all this water could probably fit in a thimble, but it's considered to be an ecosystem because there are many microbes that live there. So here's a teeny tiny microbe ecosystem, and then here's a really large land ecosystem that has many different species interactions. So there can be very large ecosystems and very large, small ecosystems. And this particular tiny ecosystem can be within this larger one. Okay, so that's why it's kind of difficult to determine where some of these ecosystem boundaries are. So let's review photosynthesis and respiration. So remember, photosynthesis captures energy and then the respiration releases it. And we just need to review a few things here. So a producer is an organism that uses the energy from the sun to produce usable forms of energy. These are also known as autotrophs, so they make their own food. Remember, we cannot get energy from the sun and use it as our own, so we can't just absorb radiation and convert it to usable energy. We have to get our energy from what we eat. So when we eat plants, we're eating those simple and complex carbohydrates that have been created from photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is just the process by which producers use solar energy to convert carbon dioxide and water into glucose. And remember, glucose is a sugar. Cellular respiration is the process by which cells unlock the energy of chemical compounds. And remember, for us, cellular respiration happens in our mitochondria. It's when we create ATP, and then carbon dioxide is a byproduct of that. So we breathe in oxygen and we release CO2 after we have created our energy in our cells. Aerobic respiration is the process by which cells convert glucose and oxygen into energy, CO2, and water. And then anaerobic respiration is the process by which cells convert glucose into energy in the absence of oxygen. So the difference is just anaerobic respiration creates energy without oxygen. So here is a depiction of photosynthesis and respiration. And remember that these two things are basically the same chemical equation, they're just flipped on opposite sides. So here for photosynthesis, we have our sunlight, carbon dioxide, and then water go in, and then oxygen and glucose are produced, right? And then on the flip side, when we have respiration, we as organisms, we breathe in oxygen and we eat glucose, then we will release water as a byproduct, as well as breathe out CO2, and then we get our energy in the form of ATP. So the relationship between photosynthesis and respiration, they're basically the same equation, they're just flipped on the products and the reactants. And also the energy source is just different. So in photosynthesis, the energy source is the sun, and then in respiration, the energy source is this glucose, the sugar. Oh, and just a reminder as well, plants do both photosynthesis and respiration. So they do produce food in the form of glucose, but then they have to use some of that glucose in order to make energy. So plants do both photosynthesis and respiration, whereas animals, humans only do respiration. We can't do photosynthesis. So some ecosystems are more productive than others. So when we talk about production, we're talking about photosynthesis. So the gross primary productivity, or GPP, is the total amount of solar energy that producers in an ecosystem capture via photosynthesis over a given amount of time. So basically, GPP is all the photosynthesis that's taking place in an ecosystem. The net primary productivity, or the NPP, is the energy captured by producers in an ecosystem minus the energy producers respire. So basically, NPP is your GPP minus respiration. And you guys are going to have to calculate that today in your virtual lab. So here's just a depiction of ecosystem productivity. So producers typically capture only about 1% of available solar energy via photosynthesis, and this is known as the GPP, so the gross primary production. About 60% of the GPP is typically used for respiration, so 60% of that energy created is then taken in again to make energy in the form of ATP. The remaining 40% is used for the growth and reproduction of the producers, and this is known as net primary productivity, or NPP. So again, this radiation falls to the earth. The GPP, 60% of it is lost to respiration, and then your net primary productivity, about 40% of GPP supports the growth and reproduction of producers. So again, our net primary productivity is the GPP minus the energy from respiration. 1% of solar energy striking producers is captured by photosynthesis. So we actually the producers don't even take up that much radiation. It's just kind of impossible for them to be able to absorb it all. And then 99% of that energy is reflected or passes through producers without actually being absorbed. So in terms of the radiation that falls onto the earth in a year, or on any given days, not much of it is absorbed. 1% of the total energy is absorbed by the producers and actually used for primary production. And that is all I have for you for this lesson. It's a shorter one, mostly because you guys are going to be doing a virtual lab today. So I will create a separate video explaining that, but this is the end of your guided notes and your lecture for today.